What's going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another one of our Mythic Pluses and what to do about them. Now, I would like to say thank you all for joining us. It is Season 3 of Dragonflight, Week 13. In my personal opinion, we are just over the hump. I think that this is probably around the midpoint of this season, first of all. And then I would like to say, make sure you hit that subscribe button here so you can see when we end up giving you more information every single week. Now, the first thing I will tell you is that we end up having a couple of really interesting affixes this week, and we're going to go through those, and we're going to go through the dungeons, and hopefully you'll enjoy them and understand what is going on with them. Now, the first thing I will say, make sure you check out our channels, make sure you end up checking our merch store, check out all that stuff to support the channel. I greatly appreciate it, and I love you all for coming and hanging out. We try to put some new stuff up there very often. Now, what of our new affixes for this week? It is going to be Fortified, Volcanic, and Spiteful. Now, what does that mean for us? As always, we're going to read through, and this is what we end up having. So, Fortified, non-boss enemies are going to have more health, and they're going to do more damage to you as you pull through. And then the next thing we got is the Volcanic, which is the little rumbling underneath your feet, and it knocks you up into the air. Mostly it ends up going after range first, and then it'll go after melee if they're too close. And then the last thing is Spiteful, which is those little dudes that are going to end up spawning, which is going to end up doing damage to you if they hit you with melee. So that is a pretty interesting combo of affixes in my personal opinion. Now, let's go ahead and talk about them and how this is really going to affect you. In my personal opinion, this is going to be really interesting because you're going to have lots of multiple different things you're going to have to deal with throughout the whole entire time, throughout the whole entire dungeon. So let's start from the top. We're going to talk about Dawn of Infinites, Galakron's Fall. That is the first half of Dawn of Infinites. Now, what does that mean for you? The fortified portion is going to mean you can't pull crazy large, because in Dawn of Infinites, that place is known for having really hard-hitting mobs. So you got to really be careful right there when you're ending up pulling through those. And then on top of that, you really don't have that much like movement, at least in the first little bit of pulls. So you got to really be careful on, your spacing for your Volcanic. And in addition to that, your Spitefuls. Your Spitefuls really are going to hurt you a lot. So healers, be really careful with that. Healers are going to be taking a lot of annoyances this week, between having to get out of the Volcanics, having the tanks take extra damage because of the Fortifieds, and then the people are going to start taking damage because of the Spitefuls. So you got that three things going on, so you really got to be careful on what you're going to end up doing and how you're going to be dealing with those throughout the whole entire time. So be careful of that. The bosses aren't going to be too bad, but you're going to have those issues throughout the whole entire dungeon, which means the pulls around the second boss are going to be really hard to deal with. The dragons that are going to be coming right before the third boss are going to be more difficult. You're going to want to split those. You don't want to pull them all together. And, the ending portion, when you're going to be going towards the last boss, that hallway you have to be careful of, because those mobs are going to be really hard to deal with, and you don't have much movement, so your melee are going to have to move around and deal with that appropriately. So think of that there. As for Murazan's Rise, which is the second half, you have that first groups of mobs that are around that first boss. That is going to be really hard to deal with. You have those mini bosses that are going to do a lot of damage, so you got to really be careful of those as you're going through. Now, the bosses aren't going to be too bad, so be careful of dealing around the battlefield. So be careful of that there. They're not going to do too much damage, but be aware of what's going to happen there. And then you're going to have the mobs that are going to be going right before the last boss. Those guys are really going to be packing a real punch, so be careful of them when you're ending up dealing with it. Thankfully, you should have enough room to mess around and move around for the Spitefuls. That's not going to be too bad for you. Waycrest Manor is going to be really hard, in my personal opinion, this week. The mobs there are really hard hitting. You're going to have to deal with a lot of those. You're going to have to deal with not much movement because you're going to be in hallways. So Spitefuls are going to be pretty much a worry and concern. So be careful of that. Pull most of the stuff into the hallway if you can. all of the witches are really, really going to be hurting. Make sure you're getting those interrupts going. And those madams, those are going to be really, really hurting. So try to take other mobs and try to avoid them if at all possible. So yeah, that's a real concern and a worry there. Then a Toltazar. A Toltazar, where you're going to have your biggest worry is your larger pulls. That place is really easy to deal with, but the pulls, if you pull them too big, they're just going to cause too much damage to your tank. They're going to cause too much damage to your, for your healer to deal with. So when you're ending up pulling there, make sure you're pulling, small enough that you're going to be able to deal with that. If you end up taking the left route from the entrance, those mobs are really going to hurt a lot more than if you pull the right groups, because the right groups you can actually pull as smaller groups. So take that into consideration this week as you're going through. Dark Heart Thicket, you're going to have a lot of problems with movement because some of the areas are very, very tight where you're moving. You can't go left or right because you're going to pull more mobs. You can't go back because you're going to have mobs behind you because there's lots of skips and things like that throughout that whole entire dungeon. At least the bosses aren't going to be doing that much damage to you, but make sure you continue to keep an eye on your interrupts throughout the whole entire dungeon. That is going to play into some type of effect and something that's going to happen to you. So keep an eye on those as you're going through. In my personal opinion, you really need to take that into account as you're going through. Now, I will say that the groupings, you can pull decent sized packs in there and not have to worry about, like this week I had to worry about bursting, but this upcoming week you're gonna have to deal with a lot of the larger damage amounts that are going to end up coming out of that. So be aware of those. Now the next thing, Blackrock Hold. Blackrock Hold has a lot of large mob pulls with small counts, so be really aware of that while you're pulling things. Pretty much in the first half, that first group before the first boss, those mobs really hurt. You're going to want to split those up if you can. And then after that, you're going to take your next boss. And after that, those mobs from from the first boss to the second boss, those guys really hurt. So be careful of all of those mobs. Make sure you're getting those interrupts on the arcane mages and so on and so forth. And then after that, you're going to have to be careful of, the mobs in between the second and third boss, because those are really large group packs, and those fortifieds are really going to hit the tanks hard, and the Spitefuls are really going to prevent you from, because of the groups of mobs around, you have to be careful of your movements. So be careful of that there. And then from the last portion of that, you're going to have your lancers, and I think they're called foot soldiers, I think they are. Those guys are going to be dealing with a lot of damage in between, I think it's the third boss and the last boss. So you got to be careful, and you got to think of those and plan all that stuff out. This week, it's really going to be involving, for instance, that dungeon is going to be a lot of quick pulls, and it's going to involve a lot of, trying to make sure that the healer is taken care of with drinking and so on and so forth. People using personal defenses, interrupts, things like that. You're going to have to really be aware of that. Everbloom, you're going to have that dungeon there, which is going to be doing a lot of pulls are in there, a lot of mobs. So you're going to have a lot of Spitefuls to deal with. You're going to have to do lots of packs. The mobs in a lot of those packs really don't hurt in the first half of the dungeon, but once you start having to pull on an Abomination or a Berserker, those guys are going to end up starting to pull a lot of damage to your mobs. So you got to be really, really, really careful of that. And then after that, you're going to have to really be careful of the mages and things like that in the second half. I'm happy that, we don't have to deal with the tyrannical bosses, because this week would be really, really hard with these affixes with tyrannical. And then the last dungeon, we're going to end up talking about is Throne of Tide. As always, Throne of Tide is really, really difficult to deal with, either tyrannical week or fortified week. You really don't have much movement in the hallways. You're going to have to deal with Spitefuls now and Volcanic, so you're going to be getting ping-ponged around. So that's going to be really hard to deal with. The mobs are really going to be hurting, so you got to make sure you're dealing with interrupts, stuns, and so on and so forth throughout the whole entire time. So be really, really careful of those and kind of go through fluidly, and you'll eventually get those down, but it's going to be really, really hard to deal with. So keep all that in mind while you're ending up dealing with it. So, all right. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about the dungeons. I really tried to give you a little bit of insight. If you have any more questions or any more thoughts about any of these dungeons we're talking about, check out our other videos. I put out commentary plays. I pretty much explain the whole entire dungeon as we're doing it. There's fast forward portions, there's regular portions, the boss fights. I kind of talk about those in general and what I'm doing and how things are. We talk about, our druid, our monk, our priest, our rogue, throughout those whole entire times. I try to give, some type of, overview on most of those dungeons throughout the whole entire time. So thank you very much. I greatly appreciate you hanging out and seeing this video. I will see you all soon. I love you. Dream big, keep gaming. Make sure you check us out every single Monday through Friday on twitch.tv. And, Lord PeteyTV is here always, on Instagram, Twitch, TikTok, Instagram, all those fun things. So thanks again, everybody. Love you. See you soon. Make sure you check out all of your gaming needs using Sub2R for your gaming glasses, for your green screens, for your cameras, all that fun stuff. They got some cool cameras coming out very, very soon. And, Rogue Energy Drink, make sure you use Lord PeteyTV there as a code. So thank you again, everyone. Have a good one. Bye, everybody.